This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. There is no original date given for this interview. The interviewer is not identified on this tape. The interviewee is Professor Gerald Taylor Stubbs, that's capital Stubbs, of Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This interview took place in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This interview is being re-recorded on October the 20th, 1986 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
Let's see, yeah.
Now, if you give us your name, something about who you are.
I'm Gerald Taylor Stubbs, Stillwater, Oklahoma. I was born in Whitewright, Texas in 1894. And as a baby, my parents brought me to Indian Territory, to the little town of Atoka. It was by coincidence and one of those accidents of fate that decreed that I be reared in Oklahoma, beginning in Indian Territory, rather than in Colorado, because it had been the plan of my parents to take me to Colorado and to transfer our residence there from Texas. So I've spent my life since the first 18 months in the state of Oklahoma, and I've had the experience of participating and observing the development of a new state into its present status and point of development, along with the development and institution of the various institutions that go along with the development of a new state. Particularly my relationship has been with the public education at both the public school, elementary and secondary level, and into the colleges and universities.
Professor, why don't you start at the beginning and tell us something about your first activity, your first school, and some of the things that happened, what it was like.
My first attendance of a school was in the Indian Territory period when the white people could not establish public schools. There was in our little town a missionary, a Baptist missionary school for orphan Indian children. And when I became 6 years of age and ready for education, the people in this town had arranged with this institution for the white children to attend along with these orphan Indian children. And then after 1 year, they were able then to establish their own schools under the laws of Arkansas, which the territory operated at that time. So then they built the first white school for white children in our little community there, and I began taking or going to school there in the public schools in Atoka, and continued through the public schools, and later became the superintendent of schools of the school where I graduated in high school. The experience in dealing with these Indian children and being somewhat the minority group was an experience that few people have. I remember one huge boy that was a kind of a burly type of fellow, and he was inclined to be a bully. He had all of us smaller boys scared of him. And one day it came that I had to confront him. And I found out that he wasn't nearly as courageous as I had always feared, and we broke his control over him, because when I stood up to him, why, he turned and ran and did not continue his domination of the rest of us. And it was to the relief of a lot of my associates that we had broken his command. My first professional work and teaching was in a one-room rural school in Atoka County, in the edge of Atoka County. This itself was quite an experience and is not very common in the day. In fact, it's very seldom that you'll find this kind of a situation. And it was different. It was quite an experience to me because I had never attended a rural school. So I had a lot to learn along with it, and I'm rather of the opinion that I didn't do much teaching, but I did a lot of herding. In fact, during the year, I enrolled 81 students, and there were 8 grades, but there was never a great many of them there at any one time. They came and went so rapidly that it was a difficult thing to keep an organization there. After that, 2 years I was invited to come back and teach in the school where I had my high school and public school training, and I taught 2 years in the elementary school and then 2 years as an elementary teacher principal. And then became the superintendent of schools there and served 8 years there, and then moved from Oklahoma to Healdon, Oklahoma, in the new experience for me, moving from an agricultural background community, rather stable and so forth. I went into a community that had been a boom oil development area with all of its wild experiences. Most of that had, fortunately, to me, had passed before I came there, but still had all of the traditions and stories and so forth. And one of the things that I experienced there, which was quite different and showed how the change in the communities in the early state, in the early development of our state was, that I remember that the question came up of finding someone to play the piano for our musical groups, choral groups in high school. Well, in the community where I had spent my early life and where I had been superintendent of schools and teacher, that wasn't ever a question because we always had many girls particularly who had taken piano because piano and music was a feature of our community, but I couldn't find anyone in our school in Healdon do that. Soon I learned what the difficulty was. The people who lived in this community were people who did not have a permanent residence. The oil companies moved them so rapidly from Pennsylvania to Oklahoma, from Illinois to Oklahoma, and back and so forth that they dare not encumber themselves with a piano to have to move. So therefore, there wasn't very many students who had had the privilege of studying piano. And that made a contrast between that. After 2 years of superintendency in Healdon, I was invited to come as superintendent in Durant, and served 16 years as superintendent of schools in Durant, in which we came through a period of rebuilding the whole school system from the plant standpoint, because they had not had progress and improvement in modernization of their plant over a period of years. And coming right after the Depression period, there was an opportunity to make some of the progress of this kind. Then in 1945, I was invited to join the staff at Oklahoma State University. Dr. Henry G. Bennett, who was president at that time, whom I had the privilege of being a personal friend over the years, while he was superintendent of schools at Hugo and county superintendent in Choctaw County, and later as president of Southeastern State College, invited me to come and join the university and to head up a new department that they were developing at the university. That time Oklahoma A&M College and not the university. The change came, the name came later. The department was to be a department to develop closer cooperation between public schools and the college. As Dr. Bennett indicated to me, they were restaffing their university, having been scattered and disorganized because of the Second World War. Most of the staff had either gone to service or in allied services attached to the university, and that they were replanning their whole field, and they needed to be sure that the college did not go off at a tangent and break connections with public schools, and they wanted someone who was acquainted with the public schools to help them coordinate and to plan in coordination with the development. And entitled the director of the Department of Public School Services. And one of the first activities that I inaugurated after coming to the college was a program of aiding public schools in the development of counseling guidance. And shortly thereafter, we were able to bring to the campus a psychologist in the field of testing and guidance who had much technical information for that. And therefore, we were able to make progress in this. In fact, I believe the record will show that the rapid development that has come in subsequent years started with this movement that we had here at Oklahoma A&M College, in which we moved into the public schools and helped them both in the training of their staff and also furnish facilities and establish a scoring system at the university or the college that enabled them to be relieved of the laborious hand scoring and handling of data that we could do for them very quickly because of the electronic scoring devices that had been developed in the time. The experiences prior to this coming to the university, I think, are of some value in the recording of the progress of Oklahoma education. I have granted it has been a great privilege to me to have had this experience that you could not have in any other case, and in a period of time in the growth of to be along with this growth and to have some part in it. The greatest growth in the development in Oklahoma public education during the period of my service has been the change from the little local district, school district, much small, of course, because of the lack of travel and communication, things of that kind, to much larger administrative units, and of course then the change that have come by virtue of this in many of the other activities that have come along with it. The change in the districts to larger districts, covering more area and also encompassing a wider curricular offering, has been one of the changes that not only has come in Oklahoma, but has come throughout the nation, but particularly in this state because of the unique nature of the state as a young state. I know in visiting with some people in other states, they always related to me the problems they had of breaking down traditions. Well, Oklahoma, being a new state or coming from a territory, did not have a great deal of tradition, and they had the nature of people that was willing to try new things. And we found that in the growth of this state, that this has been a benefit rather than a handicap in many of the changes that have come in the development. The change in the basis of financing education has been in progress for some time and is still in the developmental stage. From the ad valorem tax, which was strictly and almost universally and wholly the basis of the support, it has moved to a larger participation, and this always was confined to the taxation within the local school district. It has moved first into a larger participation by the state from a larger tax base, and of course is moving now into a larger participation by the federal government in the financing of local schools. One other marked change that I observed and participated in over the time has been the shift from the administrative control of local schools from a Board of Education that in many cases consisted of 3 people, lay people, in some cases 5, and in some as many as 7 on a vocal board. The shift of the complete control of the school and the administrative acts of it to the professional staff, and particularly the superintendent of schools and to principals. This has been a change that has brought many changes in the operation of schools, and in the opinion of some, perhaps gone a little too far. In later years, I had the privilege of being the one, perhaps, and has been given the credit for developing an organization in Oklahoma known as the State School Boards Association. It has been my experience and my judgment that the school board had failed to meet its full responsibility, and it had potentials for helping education that had never been met, and that they met, and therefore they should strengthen themselves. And so I instituted the movement of this organization, which has grown some, and at this very time is in state convention in Tulsa. But along with it, and prior to it for that matter, 2 of us instituted and organized the state school administrators, or the superintendents of schools, because they had been working somewhat independently and hadn't shared in the progress and the responsibility to help one another. So I have the distinction of being somewhat the originators of these 2 organizations, and over the years, even after my retirement, I've been kept as consultant to their respective executive committees, and one of them calls me their grandfather. In addition to that, I have one other institution that I feel somewhat responsible for and have been given credits after I joined the Oklahoma State University campus, and it came at a period of time that a re-examination of the whole question of the preparation of teachers and the upgrading of the professional preparation of teachers for public schools was coming about across the nation. I was also a participant in a committee as a part of a committee to orient the whole study of the requirements for certification, for licensing, and for preparation at the universities and college levels of the teacher preparation program. And that came through the State Department of Education, and we then moved, and at that time I was the representative on the campus of Oklahoma A&M College, so I was given the responsibility to organize the staff at the university for the purpose of meeting these changes in the preparation, and became the director of teacher certification and also the chairman of a council that we developed on the campus in the changing of the whole pattern of preparation of teachers on the college level. Up to that time, the preparation of teachers had been a matter of offering an outline of courses that was specified by the state as a requirement for certification.
You know, Professor, right at this point, I think you probably have a tremendous story that you could give us on, for instance, the curriculums that we had way back and how they compare yesterday with today. I wonder if you could maybe start back in grade school and bring it up and compare what they had then and what they have now and bring it on up to the college level, a kind of a comparison.
Of course, back in the early days of the state, as it was across, I think, pretty well generally across the nation, the elementary school was a lot of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and it was confined strictly to that. The secondary schools were predominantly, in most cases, college preparation, and it was purely an academic preparation for an academic experience at the college level. Since that period of time, there's been great changes as it's come about because of the change in our social structure and our industrial and economic needs of our nation. The public schools and the social area in the cultural background in which they operate need to be always integrated and have a cross-fertilization of influence. The public schools must serve the interests of society in that it serves the purposes of those who are going to be that, and then it draws its support and its influence and its direction from the society that it serves. So therefore the change has come in that secondary education particularly has shifted from this college preparatory more to the scientific, the mathematics, and courses of that kind, and the technical training that has come because of the need and the recognition that more and more pupils were going to high school, whereas many times back in times past, 8th grade was the end of the training of many children. The European influence and pattern that had existed came to the people who had come to this country, and they felt that that was all the formal education that was needed. But the change came in the new vision of our people to go through at least a high school education, and a college and a high school diploma was a requirement for many types of employment. But the relation of what they had in high school had very little to do with what they needed in the employment field, so they began to train more there. So over that period of time, we have shifted completely to that, and the strict academic college preparation has become a very minor consideration in the secondary. Now in the colleges have at one time were the ivory tower type of institutions in which they didn't feel any much relationship to what went along in the industrial, economic, and social world. They operated in a vacuum, as it were, and many of their courses were traditional from European influence of higher education. But the need came for a closer relationship to what was in the industrial development of this nation. So they have moved rapidly into the field of a close working relationship with industry and business, in which they have planning cooperative committees to help plan and to evaluate what's going on, and to bring back alumni that have gone out and have taken place to help them evaluate their programs. And it's becoming more now in a more practical program. Also, government influences. All higher education has pretty well had working relationships with industry, business, and government in the research, in the contributions they made in that. Of course, it's brought many tensions also that we are hearing about in the protests on some of the college campuses. These have come about, and also there's been some very great changes at all levels in the administrative control of public education during my experience. In the public schools, there has grown up militant groups of classroom teachers who have challenged the control of public schools from the standpoint of boards of education and school administrators, and the tensions that have come, and they have insisted on having more control. They have been stimulated in this by the National Education Association, which has gotten under the domination somewhat, to my way of thinking, of some people who are not very well oriented to the real traditional and basic fundamentals of what public education should do, and their influence is having some from my standpoint, having some ill effects upon the professional attitude. I think there's going to be a reaction to this. I think I already sense it and see it in those with whom I'm associated. At the same time, on the college level, the faculty has, through its organization, has demanded more control over the administration of higher education. And in the institutions, there's been a struggle, and it's going on now throughout the nation in the respective institutions between faculty administrative control over presidents and boards of regents and so forth. It's the same. It's reflect the same movement that's in society, in the civil rights movements and things of that kind that are going on there. Of course, one of the impacts upon public education that has come within recent years and come during my lifetime has been the integration of the minority groups and the racial groups. That's affected public education from the primary on through the higher education, and is a force that is still being a very effective one in movements of changes and orientation, both of curriculum, of administration, and of everything. And many of the problems that have arisen are still to be resolved and to be solved in that. But it is a new influence that has come in a very potent way. The relaxation of disciplinary control at all levels of education has been one of the most striking things that, to me, has come during the years. During my experience in public school work, which extended over 31 years, there wasn't much problem of this. Families pretty well controlled their children, and children came to school with the tradition of praying of being under the discipline of older people and of their parents particularly. Parents supported school discipline and helped us in that, and the children accepted it from that standpoint. But there's been a change completely, a submissive, permissive type of thing that has put many teachers in a very difficult situation. Just recently, I was told by those who are in charge of our Oklahoma teacher retirement system that they have had only within the last few months increasing number of teachers coming in who have arrived at the minimum age of retirement and asking for retirement, saying that I really had planned to go on several more years, but I can't take it any longer. The conditions under which I have to work and the tensions and pressures in which I have to do are of such a nature that I'm just about to go to pieces, and that I'm seeking to get out of it and run from it. And that itself needs to can have a re-examination by all lay people, and parents particularly, because it is threatening the very organization of education at all levels, both the colleges and the public and elementary schools. In higher education, some of the striking changes that have come during this period of my service in Oklahoma has been the change from the boards of control from politically dominated and control to constitutional boards that gave stability to the institutions, and also gave a feeling of security to those who were employed to administer. And they've been able to make long-time plans, whereas they didn't know from day to day that they were going to be there the day. I have lived through the experience that being superintendent in a school, in a community where there was one of the state colleges, and seeing three presidents come in a period of 6 years, each serving 2-year periods because of the change in the political complexion in the state. Also, of course, along with it came the adoption of a constitutional amendment to adopt the Board of Regents of Higher Education for the purpose of coordination of the administration and the curricular offerings of the various institutions. This has brought a long-time planning and a unification of the whole program of that. In addition to the changes in higher education, has come the rapidly development of junior colleges and technical schools. That has been speeded up rapidly within the last 5 years, and is in the process now of an experimental age, you might say, to what extent it should go. There's some feeling perhaps that there'll be some re-examination of the movement, but it is also a reflection, of course, upon the technical development in the field of industry and business that requires people to be trained in technical fields. The rapid explosion, as we call it sometime, of the enrollment, both in the public schools and the higher education, because of the increase in population, the birth controls that hit us back in after the Second World War and beginning in the early part of the war, had first moved through the public schools and now is in the colleges and higher education, has brought on problems of finance, of plant to take care of them, the housing situation. A new factor that all colleges have had is a matter of having a place to park automobiles, which is a kind of a ridiculous situation, but is a part of our social development. And many campuses, this campus including, has invested millions of dollars upon space just to park cars. For a child who come to college now without a car is a disadvantaged child, and parents just don't send them to college without sending along, and some come with more than that. Only a year or two ago I knew of a case in which a boy came to this university. He not only had a car, but he had a Jeep and then had a boat, and when finding place to live, he needed to find place to park all of his transportation facilities. And that is added, of course, to our economic affluence that has come along with our development here. The universities and colleges have found out coming out of their fear of the ivory tower system, they have developed a closer working relationship without sending along, and some come with more than that. Only a year or two ago I knew of a case in which a boy came to this university. He not only had a car, but he had a Jeep and then had a boat, and when finding place to live, he needed to find place to park all of his transportation facilities. And that is added, of course, to our economic affluence that has come along with our development here. The universities and colleges have found out coming out of their fear of the ivory tower system, they have developed a closer working relationship with public schools, particularly with secondary schools, as I indicated was one of the charges that I had given to me when I came to Oklahoma A&M College, and one of the purposes and thoughts that the president had that they needed to be closer in their relationship and planning, and to rather have a rather rapid break between the way in which the two institutions operated, to have a smoother one, and to share with one another in their respective problems. And this has developed. In addition, of course, the colleges have developed a very close working relationship with one another, closer than it used to be. They operated somewhat. And even the independent universities and colleges of a state now are participating with the state institutions, and all feel that they have a common problem in which they can help one another to be more of service to society and to the world in which they're free. On the college levels, and one of the things that perhaps is causing more difficulty is the militant action of some student groups, and this is becoming, of course, as we well know, a real threat to the stability and to the operation of colleges. It is to be hoped that rather soon there will be enough strength in administrative control that this will be gotten under control. Otherwise, difficulties are ahead of most significant extent. One of the changes to which I've had a great interest and have had considerable participation has been the improvement in the preparation of teachers at all levels. It was greatly needed, and the control has also moved to some extent from boards and of lay people who had very little know-how in the matter to more control of the profession itself, as other professions have had over the type of people that should become a part of their profession, and also the preparation that they needed to go through in order to be fully professional trained people. This improvement, here is the aspect of it that has been most striking in its change. As I indicated previously, some of the preparation of teachers was simply a matter of having credits in a list of courses that had been specified as necessary. And many of the courses had, the content of courses had very little to do with the preparation of teachers. They were simply, the catalog said there was this course or that course, but the instructor was not conscious of the fact that it had any relationship to what a teacher was going to experience in the 4th grade, for instance, in elementary school or in a high school situation. They just threw out the same material they threw to anybody else. And furthermore, people in the academic disciplines of a university and a college had no concern whatever for the fact that perhaps that institution had people attending there who were later going to be teachers at some level, at either the public school level, elementary, secondary, or to be in the colleges, and that they had a need of some specialized preparation for that particular job. So this change has come, whereas now the entire faculty of a college has been brought into the planning and to the rethinking and to the understanding that they had a responsibility as an institution rather than just some people in one of the divisions of a college and a university. And it has been a rather revealing thing. And personally, I've had the experience of serving as a chairman of a committee, Council on Teacher Education at Oklahoma State University, the first one to established here, and to serve during 15 years a period as the chairman of that, and to direct the development of this, and involving as many as 250 faculty members in the planning of the different courses and so forth. This movement started pretty much at this institution that is now spread throughout the nation. And I had the privilege of being one of those in the early development of it, and the concept was sound, and therefore it proved to be so. And it has been a revelation to be associated with people in all the disciplines, and to get them to bring to the bearing upon the preparation their know-how and their special information and things of that kind. And it has brought teaching profession forward in a great way over a short period of time.
Who were some of the other people that were interested in this and perfecting this along with you, or developing it along with you?
You mean at the local,
Well,
in the state?
yes.
Well,
worked with. I mean, just a few.
Dr. Oliver Hodge, who was state superintendent of public instruction at the time, was one who participated. He and I were on the committee that originally started at the state level, and then we moved into the respective colleges and universities. And being associated with this college, I was responsible here for bringing the same planning and so forth onto this campus. And then, of course, the dean of the College of Education here, as well as other places. So it's been a cooperative effort in which many people have been here. Now,
Well, that's what I was trying to
Yes,
get at, who
yeah.
some of the other people were that were associated with you along with this program?
Well, those are some of them. Of course, I could name a great list of them, and some of them, like myself, have also retired. Some have passed away since that time, but they've made their contribution, and it is in progress now. And most of the same idea has been pretty well adopted on all of the campuses in the state. And they have these councils in which they involve all their faculty members instead of just a few that later at one time.
That's true. That's what we would like to know. You know it, but we don't know it. Who they are, what they were. This is an interesting thing because I'm sure a lot of other people worked right along with you, hand in glove, and while you're being interviewed and being taped here, those people probably never will, and they were probably as active maybe as you were, all of them. And that's the only reason I ask who some of the other names to go down for posterity so that they will know that there were, and maybe a lot of them will be well known.
When you get old, you lose sight of some names, and I was trying to I was trying to run back and recite, and I'd have to go back and look at some of my notes to bring some of them back because many of them have already passed to their rewards. I'm kind of like the fellow, you know, that in the religious meeting you ask if he had any enemies. He said no, he'd outlived them all. And so I've fortunately have passed the years beyond some of the rest of them. But there was a great movement in the state.
Yes, I'm sure. And I have that memory lapse myself. I know what you're talking about.
The several institutions in this state that I'm rather I'm a little proud of having had something to do with it because they're making their impact on schools and somewhat leave something that you can say that you made a contribution that will continue to go on because it's sound on the basis of it. I mentioned the Oklahoma Association of School Administrators that Joe Godbey, who was superintendent of schools in Ardmore at that time, he and I was superintendent in Durant, headed up the movement to organize this group of school administrators. Never before had they had an organization. This happened in 1924, and it has grown in strength and in influence over the years and is very active in its leadership in public education in the state. Then in 1945, I was instrumental, and at that time I was serving as president of the Oklahoma Education Association. And as I indicated previously, I was of the opinion that that school boards were not as effective as lay people as they should be. And their influence was not being felt in the planning. Neither were they serving as somewhat of a deterrent on the school administrator who was going a little too far in some of his activities, and that they ought to be the reflective instrument of the lay people in the planning. So I organized the Oklahoma State School Boards Association. Mr. Spears, who was at that time a member of the Board of Education, McAllister, was the first president of that organization. He's passed away many years ago. And Joe Hurt, who was a member of the Board of Education in Edmond at the time, was was the first secretary. Joe is still active. He's retired from the work in which he was engaged as a representative of a publishing company, but he still lives in Edmond and is active in the work of, in fact, he's at this time one of the employees of the Oklahoma State School Boards Association. Another organization that I participated in, and not in a major responsibility, but for a number of years, a number of us was recognizing that we needed a retirement system for teachers in Oklahoma. And we spent several years trying to get it over in Oklahoma, but in 1943 we finally got an approval by a state live election to establish it as a constitutional provision to allow an institution to be created. The first retirement came in retirees was in 1947. I've been associated with closely all over these years, and since my retirement, I have spent a lot of time and much participation in the further development of this organization. I have served as president of the Oklahoma Education Association, the president of county associations, and nearly all of the local units, and then since then the similar state and local units of the retirement system. And I also have served as chairman of their legislative committee, which I've worked with the state legislature in the perfection and improvement of our program. And this, as a corollary of and an associate of the state retirement system, which is a governmental agency, we have organized the retired teachers. And there are more than 7,000 teachers who have retired in the state who are now drawing retirement benefits. And this Oklahoma Retired Teachers Association is the agency that I've served as president, and also as I'm on their board of control at this time, as well as some of the boards that of the other. Then the other institution that I've had something to do with that I indicate is a perpetual or a continuing service in this, is this Oklahoma Council on Teacher Education that I mentioned earlier, in which Dr. Hodge and others participated in the forming of this. So, and then the Council on Teacher Education on the campus of Oklahoma, which are 5 institutions that I feel just a little proud about, without being boastful, I hope, that have made contributions and are going to make contributions, still making contributions, and will over the years in the improvement of public education. I've devoted my life to public education. I believe it's one of the fundamental necessities of a democratic society. It's the very life-giving instrument, and the quality of it is must be improved constantly and must be reevaluated in terms of the need of the social structure. One of the changes, just quickly summarizing, that's come in all public education has been the shift from quantity to quality. There was a period of time when we were all concerned about getting the children in school, and all the children. And that was really a problem in those days, not quite understood by people now. Well, that time passed when people accepted that everybody ought to go to school, and even moved up in their vision for their own children from graduation at 8th grade to high school and then to universities and colleges. And nowadays it's rather accepted that everybody must go to college. There might be some question about that as to the conclusion, but that seems to be the thing. Well, it's brought the influx of great numbers, which has also brought the question now the matter of getting them in has been pretty well solved. Now we must be sure that we have here something that's really worthwhile to give them while they're here. So the quality of the offering, of the instruction, is getting more emphasis and has been getting more emphasis, and the movement that I mentioned about the improvement of teacher training is the basis to that whole thing. After all, the quality of education is pretty much determined by the one that's in charge of it and the classroom teacher that the child and the youth and adult meets and deals with there. And so if that person isn't the right kind of a person, and then fortified by a good sound preparation and training, the quality of the program will be very questionable and inadequate in the basis of it.
Professor Stubbs, before we close this, I know there's bound to be one or two funny or comical things that happened to you, or something your students did to you years ago, or I know how kids are with their teachers because I was one once, you know. And I'll bet you have a storehouse of those things. Maybe you could give us one or two.
I have one that, since you've raised it, just pops into my mind, and the individual lives in this state now and is in a community in the eastern part of this state. This boy was a real boy. He was a redhead, which many times we have associated with real boys, and he was one of these mischievous type of fellow, but never a fellow that caused anything of real great danger or that you could really condemn. He was just full of activity and interest, and many times interest was other than academic. And I was the principal of an elementary school at this particular time, and on the campus we had a boy also, which is not unusual, who was one of these tattletales. And one day as I came to the campus from lunch, the tattletale met me at the edge of the campus and said, "Miss Stubbs, you know where some of the boys have gone?" And it was the spring of the year. And I said, "Well, I wouldn't know." Well, he said, and he named this boy and some others had gone swimming. The school was on the edge of the development of residential area of the town, and I was well acquainted with the whole area because I'd grown up in that area, and so I knew about where they'd gone to a pool over there, a mile or so from the school building. He said they've gone swimming, and it was a temptation, the spring of the year and so forth. I said, "Well, you just go on and tend to your business and go on into your class, and I'll take care of that." So after school was convened, I took my stroll over that way, and as I topped a hill, I looked down toward this pool, and there they were. Stark naked, of course, as boys bathed in that day and time, and they were having a time. So I thought, well, I started just to walk straight down across the prairie. It was right open from there where I was on this hill down to this pool, which was in the little creek had been dammed up. But I thought, well, I'll take a little circle and come in on behind the dam. But about the time I got part of the way, some boy, they had a watchman out, spied me, and the alarm was given. And this red-headed boy didn't have time to grab up his clothes. He started running across the hill on the other side on an open prairie, and I couldn't, it was the most comical thing to see him. He was tall, and he was running like an antelope, and making it for some timber on the other side. Well, I walked on down there, and there was one little boy, a much smaller boy, who hadn't been in the water, and he was crying. I said, "Well, don't cry about it." And he said, "Well," I said, "let's go on back to school," and there were some clothes there. I said, "Well, we better not leave these clothes here." Well, he said, "This is," and he named this boy, said it's his clothes. I said, "Yes, I suspected he didn't have any clothes on when I saw him running across the prairie up there." And I said, "Well, we better take this back because he'll need them sometime." So we just picked them up and brought them on back to school. And so that afternoon, I was also training the track team from the high school, and they'd come up on the campus, and so I was out on the campus with the track boys from high school, and this and another boy who'd been in this gang came up to me, and he sidled up to me, and he said, "J.B. wants his clothes." I said, "Wants his clothes?" And I had him up in the office. He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, where is J.B.?" And this boy was a fellow that just had difficulty telling truth. I'd had that experience with him. And he said, well, he just gave a kind of a general, "He's down this way." And so I said, "Well, let's go get his clothes." And I went and got his clothes and started out of the office. And I watched this boy who had come to report on it, and he unconsciously started toward where J.B. was, and it was near the campus, just over a little hill. But then he thought he'd told me otherwise, so he changed his direction. So I knew right where he was. So I just got him, went down there, and I stood behind a tree when he took the clothes to him, and it was his sight when you see him burst out of the little brush that he was in and start running with his clothes in his hand. So we had a conference the next day, of course, that usually followed those. But the answer to the thing, and I had an occasion several times to punish this boy, but he has the greatest respect for me yet. He gets me into a crowd now, and he's a grown man with children, and I'm a grandfather, and he tells these stories on me right in these crowds, and thanks me for doing it. So it gives me some satisfaction that maybe I didn't do too many things wrong, but we held that. But that is one of the interesting things they had.
Thank you so much.